Today on DIY's Garden Sense, all the information you need to make great tree selections for your landscape.
I'll show you tricks for buying trees and avoiding problems like this. You'll see which trees offer privacy and which ones are colorful show-offs. Plus, step-by-step planting instructions so you can plant great-looking trees yourself.
You wanted funky plants for your landscape, and I think this is one of the funkiest I could find. When I was a kid, this was one of my favorite places in the world to be, safely ensconced amongst the limbs of a big old tree. From here, I could see for miles, or better yet, I could spy on my brothers and sisters. But while the Garden Sense crew has taken away my BB gun, I do come armed with an arsenal of information to help you make sensible tree selections.
Today, you'll see how to buy the right sized tree for your landscape. You'll get advice on choosing shade trees, ornamentals, trees with year-round color, plus sensible planting tips to make sure your trees get a good start in your landscape. Log on to DIYnetwork.com for complete details on every tree we're planting. Just type in your zip code to get zone-specific information so you can make sensible tree selections for where you live.
Let's get started with my 5 guidelines for picking the right tree. And number 1 has got to be know the mature size of the tree before you get started planting. It's one of the most common mistakes gardeners make. And the result is this red maple behind me. It has been butchered by the power company who have to prune it every year to keep it out of those power lines. And all that pruning leads to stubs, and the stubs lead to rot, and the rot leads to the death of some of those vertical limbs.
Guideline number 2 is to make sure you know what conditions your tree needs to grow. For example, this weeping willow requires super moist soil and would be a horrible choice in a dry landscape. Guideline number 3, determine what you want the tree to do for your landscape. Different trees bring different things, from the wow factor of cool bark to the shade from a standard maple. Number 4, choose between deciduous versus evergreen. This is especially important if you're planting for privacy. You don't want to be surprised when your tree selection turns barren each winter.
Finally, don't forget that different is good. Don't plant the same tree that everybody else in the neighborhood has. That's the reason I'm using this golden chamaecyparis right here, because there's not another one like it in the whole neighborhood. And it's important to remember that not only is planting the same tree boring, but it can also lead to trouble. You've probably heard about Dutch elm disease, which wiped out trees in neighborhood after neighborhood over the last 50 years. When one tree got sick, they all got sick, and then they all died. But before we go any further, let's talk about how to plant a tree correctly. I want to plant a fat Albert spruce right here. It gets about 15 feet tall, about 7 to 10 feet wide. And really the reason I'm planting it is because the homeowner really likes Christmas. And this will be a great place for him to display his lights. Now when you dig a hole like this, you can tell that I didn't dig this. I used an auger. An auger is a machine that has a great big motor and a great big drill that goes into the ground. And if you have a lot of trees or a big hole like this one to dig, an auger, even though it costs $200 or so to rent for a day, is a real time saver.
So let's get started with your first step being to cut the container before putting the tree in the hole. Then don't be afraid to roll the tree on its side to make planting easier. As we do this, you can see there are lots of healthy roots. The bad news is it's been growing in the container for way too long.
So we'll scar them a little bit with that knife to make them spread out some when they finally get in the hole. Okay guys, let's move it a little further.
As we gradually lower the tree into the hole, watch our sensible technique for making sure it's centered and not crooked.
It's going to need to be straightened.
If you can, get a couple of people to help if you're planting a bigger tree like this. And it's important to remember to grab the trunk, not the limbs.
A little bit more underneath. Is that straight? It's straight, pretty straight from here. Just lean it around that way so that the point then tends to lean out this way and straightens itself up naturally. Roll it. Easier said than done.
Don't rush this process. Get the tree right before adding any more soil.
Yeah, straight on my side. Okay, now let's fill it in. Now your first inclination after you've planted a tree of this size is probably to go inside and lay down on the couch, but there are a couple more steps you have to do. The first one is to build a berm around the tree. Now this is nothing but a little raised area of soil that directs rainwater down to the root system of the tree where it really needs it for the first year or so. There are actually a couple of tools that I like a lot. This is called a tree ring, and this tree ring, as you can tell, drips water right around the trunk of the tree, right down to the root ball. It's really easy to use with a water hose. And if you don't have a water hose nearby and you want to use something different, this is called a tree gator. Now, a tree gator is just a big bag. It's filled full of water. You fill it through here, and underneath it has these emitters, and these emitters then drip water down to the root system of the tree very regularly. It holds about 14 gallons of water. You fill it up every couple of days, and it waters the tree very nicely. And one last step, mulch. Mulch conserves moisture in the soil, the moisture a tree has to have in order to establish itself. And sometimes more importantly, it keeps lawnmowers from rolling up to the trunk of the tree and damaging that plant that you just put in the ground.
Coming up next, trees that explode with color every fall. Then you'll see some sensible selections for smaller landscapes.
Let's talk about some sensible selections for trees based on the size that you need. I'm going to start with a Japanese Stewardia, and then we'll move on to the much bigger Chinese elm you see behind me. I love the Stewardia because it's on the small to medium size range, and it'll help us to frame up the end of the house. And also, it has all-season interest, so planted here beside the driveway, the homeowners will really enjoy it as they go past it all during the year. Now, one of the things that you'll see on trees if you shop for them during the fall is the leaves sometimes look pretty ragged. See the sort of scorching on the tips of the leaves? Well, that is nothing to worry about. That just means the tree is about to lose the leaves as it would naturally in fall and winter. What you really need to look for is a good root system. And looking down here in the original ball area, I see great looking white, vigorous roots. This is a very nice tree, a very vigorous tree. And if you find it at a good price in the fall, it would be a steal to buy it and put it in the ground. This is just one of the many sensible selections that I've used that add a lot to the landscape without taking up a lot of space.
In Christine Edie's narrow backyard, I chose an Ukigumo Japanese maple. It's a great example of a small tree with interesting variegated leaves.
Yeah, it's kind of neat because they're speckledy.
You see the pink stem too on there? The Japanese name for it, common name would be floating cloud. And I think it does really nicely in this particular situation because it has the variegation.
Columnar-shaped trees are perfect for tight spaces. This skyrocket juniper will grow about 15 feet tall, but only 2 feet wide. I've used junipers in landscapes and also in containers to give a front entrance a formal feel. In warmer zones, the anise tree is a sensible choice.
Yeah, bring it on in, Roy, see if it fits.
This smaller tree has leathery green leaves that smell like root beer when they're crushed. And check out these unusual looking flowers. And finally, here's another tree that solves your problem if you want a lot of height but not much width. This is a weeping Yopon holly. It's low maintenance and easily tolerates wind and heat. It grows 20 feet high but not very wide.
Now let's go from small to large. My spot up here in this magnificent red maple tree. It's only about 50 years old, but it's already over 70 feet tall. Maples have more than 20 species, and they range in size from about 2 feet tall to more than 70 or 80 feet tall. They also range in growth rate from very slow growing to very, very rapid growth. I love maples. There's a maple for just about every situation in your landscape. But the reason that I like them the most is that in the fall, they're amongst the very first trees to change color.
Japanese maples provide a different look than regular maples. I love the twisting trunk and the unusually shaped leaves with pointy ends. In the fall, the Japanese maple provides spectacular color. And in this typical suburban backyard, the sensible choice for the Gilbert family is a big Armstrong maple.
And I think that will solve a couple of problems that I saw here. Number one, we needed more drama in the landscape right here on the corner of the house. Okay, roll it in if you will. Yeah. But number two, it also gives us privacy from the deck of the house to our neighbors and the road in front of the house as well. And Chris, I know that you were concerned about this would somehow affect the satellite reception you get on your dish. Fortunately, it is very columnar, so it grows upward rather than outward. This is one of my favorite large trees, and it really helps us to solve a problem that's common to a lot of homeowners. How to fill in a gap that'll keep us from having to look over into the neighbor's backyard. This is an American yellowwood, and it's considered one of the most spectacular flowering trees in the country. It gets about 30 to 40 feet high and about the same amount of width. But the thing you'll remember is the flowers in the springtime. It has long, 14-inch long, creamy flowers that smell like vanilla.
Coming up next, ornamental trees with breathtaking beauty, some unusual selections with odd shapes, and sensible advice for buying trees at the nursery.
A good shade tree is low-cost air conditioning. It gives you an escape from the sun, and sometimes, perhaps more importantly, it gives you cover from your neighbors. So here are some sensible selections for trees that give you both shade and privacy.
Willows are a great selection that get tall and wide. The key, as I said before, is to make sure you're planting them in spots where moisture is available. Silver maples can also get enormous, often towering over houses and becoming favorite spots to hang around in the fall. And in this yard, we planted 3 river birches that will get nice and wide and create plenty of screening. And look closely, we followed my sensible tree planting rule of creating berms to help these new trees take root.
Let's take a break from planting trees for a moment to talk about sensible ways to buy them. One thing you'll find here at the nursery is that trees will generally be the most expensive plants on your shopping list. So here are my 3 tips for making sure you get your money's worth and buy a good, healthy tree. First, check out the leaves. You want a tree with healthy foliage. A few insect-damaged leaves are not a problem. And if you find a tree with some interior yellowing leaves, that's not a problem either, as long as it's limited to about 10% of the total foliage. You don't want a tree that has lots of yellow leaves, particularly on the ends of the branches, or if they seem to lack vigor or much new growth. Next, check the trunk of the tree. It should be straight. The bark should be unblemished. Cracks or soft spots can indicate frost or fungal damage. You also want to check for something called codominant leaders. And here's what I'm talking about. When you see a V like this, where the branches are the same size, you have a potential problem. That's because as the tree grows, it can split. A better choice would be a tree with a single strong trunk, top to bottom. Finally, check for any girdling rope or wire around the trunk that can strangle the tree. Some types of rope are not designed to rot, and in the long run, they'll damage your tree. Let's talk about trees that can be accused of being show-offs in the landscape because they bring so much ornamental value. This is one I like a lot. It's called Chinese elm or lacebark elm. It's a really tough tree. It gets about 40 or 50 feet tall, and this particular variety is called alley elm. Now there's another one called Athena Chinese elm that has a nice broad outline, but alley is much more vertical and upright, and it's the right selection for this particular place. The reason it's called lacebark elm is because the bark pops off sort of like a jigsaw popping off of the trunk, and it's really attractive when you pass by it during the day.
Another common ornamental tree is Bradford pear, a much-used staple of many neighborhoods. It can be a stunner in the spring. The good thing is it's relatively free of insect problems, but it's very susceptible to branch splitting, especially in stormy weather. A more sensible alternative pear would be this Cleveland Select, also known as Chanticleer ornamental pear. It's got the same mass of white flowers as the Bradford, but a stronger branch structure that makes it one of the best flowering pear varieties around. And here's an ornamental tree with a twist.
Well, Pat, you wanted funky plants for your landscape, and I think this is one of the funkiest I could find. This is Harry Lauder's walking stick.
How could he walk with something so crooked?
Well, that was exactly the point. He was an entertainer in Scotland, and he made his whole entertainment act based on his drunken Scotsman wandering around the
that
stage.
explains it.
So he would have a walking stick looking like this, very contorted like this, you see?
With gnarly leaves.
Gnarly leaves, exactly right.
Another interesting ornamental is this Golden Ghost Japanese red pine tree. It's a newer variety with unusual bright gold on green needles. And flowering cherries are always a beautiful selection. This Yoshino variety has delicate bright white flowers. It's the same one you'll find along the tidal basin in Washington, D.C.
And finally, a smaller ornamental tree that comes with a lot of potential. This is Carolina silver bell. It should really thrive underneath the shade of these taller trees in the backyard. But you know, the reason I really like it a lot is because it's not a dogwood or a redbud. Nothing against them, but everybody has them. It has vibrant green leaves in the spring. It has white flowers that go up and down the limbs, and the flowers then are followed by these little seed pods, which you can see right now. But the thing that most people talk about the Carolina silver bell is the bark. You can see the bark, it's sort of striped and multicolored, and as it gets older, the bark gets ridges.
Next up, beauty comes with a price. You'll see how much these trees cost and how you can save money at the nursery. Looking for bargains on trees at the nursery? Here are 3 tips to save you a bundle. Number 1, do your shopping in the fall. A lot of nurseries offer deep discounts in fall months, and fall is a great time of the year to plant trees. Number 2, look for bare root trees. Generally, these trees are the best value. They can only be planted when the tree is dormant in the late winter or early spring. The one catch to bare root trees is that the selection is sometimes a little limited. And finally, number 3 is my encouragement for you to join the National Arbor Day Foundation. A membership costs much less than any tree you'll find at a nursery, and you'll get 10 free trees to plant in your yard.
We've shown you dozens of different trees, and as you can imagine, the costs vary widely.
As far as the ones I planted today, the Fat Albert spruce was the most expensive at $275, but as you saw, it was already a big, mature tree. 2 others carried price tags of more than $200. The lacebark elm cost $225, and the yellowwood cost $215. They were both less massive trees. You can expect to pay less for smaller trees like the Stewartia. It was just $94. The least expensive was the Carolina silver bell at just $81. We got a great deal on that tree. We expected to pay more, but it was on clearance.
And one final note, if you're having a bit of sticker shock at the nursery, remember that trees are a good long-term investment. The USDA Forest Service says a correctly placed tree can save 30% on your heating and cooling bills. And when it comes time to sell, mature trees can add about 10% to the value of your home. To find the right ones for your landscape, log on to DIYnetwork.com. Just type in your zip code for zone-specific information, and you'll find sensible care instructions like this.
Newly planted trees all need regular watering to establish good roots. A rule of thumb is 5 to 15 gallons, depending on the size of the tree, about every 10 days. Young trees can be fertilized with a slow-acting granular fertilizer 6 months after they're planted, then again every spring until they reach about 20 feet tall. After that, organic mulch will provide all the nutrients they need. The American yellowwood tends to flower every other year, so don't be worried if you don't see many blooms on it the first couple of years. I like this tree because the limbs grow low and densely, making a good screen even in the wintertime. Prune it in summer because winter and spring cuts tend to bleed a little bit. The Carolina silver bell prefers acidic soil. Without it, the leaves may turn yellow. Be sure to add soil conditioner or peat moss when you plant it so it will be happy in the future. Fat Albert Colorado spruce can be pruned to maintain shape and height. It likes a general purpose landscape fertilizer before the new growth begins each spring.
All of my tree selections, along with zone-specific information about planting, are available online right now at DIYnetwork.com. And I've also included some information about one of my favorite not-for-profit organizations, one that's devoted to tree climbing. Yeah, tree climbing for kids as well as kids who are just young at heart. And by the way, for the record, I didn't require any help climbing up in this tree today. I'm Walter Reeves, and if I can get back down safely, I hope I'll see you here again next time as we try to put a little common sense into your garden.